Welcome to the SAP HANA Academy. My name is Bob, and in this video we're going to be covering the concept of analytic privileges. In this video we're going to be using the SAP HANA Studio to examine how analytic privileges work. At a high level, analytic privileges enable us to secure any views that we create, and when I say views I mean calculation, attribute and analytic views. We can do things like restrict columns and restrict rows within an analytic privilege to discriminate which data a user can see. So in an example, the example I'm going to build is based on a calculation view I built in a previous video. And basically in this calculation view, if I do a data preview, it was essentially a union of two different data sets. So if I go to the raw data, what you'll see is that there's two different types of order ID. Basically, order IDs less than 1 million. And we've also got order IDs which are greater than 1 million. So in this simple example, I'm going to build an analytic privilege which only enables us to see orders which are greater or equal to 1 million. So we're doing row level security. So of course that means you can say I want to create a privilege where the product ID equals 57. So basically any where clause you can include in your analytic privilege. So to do this, what we need to do first is go and build the analytic privilege. So if I right click on my package, select new and select analytic privilege, I'll firstly need to give it a name. So I'm going to call mine STS underscore analytic underscore privilege. And then I'll press description just to add that as a description. So then we can click on next. So now we need to decide on which information model or views we want to include in that analytic privilege. So I'm going to go to my calculation view and add that calculation view here, and I'll select add. Then I'll click on finish. So when we've done this, the next thing to do is to add our associated attribute restrictions. So this is essentially which column we want to restrict on. So I can click on add, and I want to restrict on the order ID, because remember we want to say if the order ID has to be or equal to greater than 1 million. In terms of the where clause, we can do that here in assign restrictions. So I'm going to say where the order ID, and then I'll add an assign restriction, and when it's greater than or equal to, and the value is going to be 1 million. So we only want to show orders which are number 1 million or above. So that's it. When we've done that, we can save and validate just to make sure everything's okay. And of course, like any other object, we need to activate it. As you can see here, it's not activated. So then I can click on here on save and activate. And again, we can see that completed successfully. So that's the analytic privilege done. So now we need to build a user and assign some rights so we can test this analytic privilege. So to do this, I'm going to go to my security folder, go to my list of users, and I'm going to create a new user called restrict. STS restrict, and I'm going to assign them a password. Now what we need to do is assign a few of these rights. So let's look at the most obvious ones first. Let's go to the package privileges. Now any of the content is located, any of these objects are located within a package called STS. So the first thing we need to do is assign that package. So I'm going to do a search for STS, select that STS package, and the only right we really need to give here is to be able to read from the repository. So I'm going to select repo read. Next, let's obviously go to analytic privileges. So this is kind of obvious. We need to add our analytic privilege. So we've only got one. So if I do a search, we've got one called STS analytic privilege. So I'm going to add this one, and there's nothing here to configure. Now, in terms of roles, we don't need to do anything here, but we need to pay attention to parts of SQL privileges and system privileges. And what I'll do is I won't allocate these yet. I'll walk you through what happens if we don't allocate them. So what I'll do is I'll create that. So we've created that user, restrict, STS restrict. And of course, to test, we're going to create a new system or a new connection based on that user. So I'll call this restrict. I'll use that user that we just created. And the password. And again, because it's a new user, I'll be prompted to enter a new password. There we go. So we've got that new connection. So again, we've not added any of the system privileges we might need or the SQL privileges. So if I go now and try and go to, for example, drill into that user and go to my content folder, firstly, we don't see the actual content within our, we don't see any of the packages yet. There's a reason, because we have to allocate certain rights within our SQL privileges. So to get over this issue, what we need to do is add a SQL privileges. If we click on the green button to add the privilege, we're going to search for repository rest. And all we need to do here is allocate the execute right, and that will enable us to drill into our content. So I'll execute that modification of the user, and I'll just refresh this connection. But now we've got other issues we've got to deal with. So this will indicate that we cannot open the table administration editor because we don't have the required privileges of catalog read and data admin. So to obtain these, all we need to do is go to our system privileges and then add two of those privileges. One of them is that catalog read, and also one was data admin, which is here. There we go. Again, I'll execute that user. So we've updated the user, and I'll just refresh that connection. So now I can see that I can drill into my content. We see that package, the STS package, and I can drill in. Now the key thing is here is I can see all the other packages, and all the other objects. So if I select one of those objects, as expected, if I do a data preview, we don't have any authorization. But unfortunately, the same applies to the calculation view. If I try and do a data preview, we have no authentication. So what it looks like is that we have to give a read-only access to that view. So we can do this in our SQL privileges, and I'm going to add another SQL privilege. I'll type in the name of my view, so it's STS underscore calc. It's this one. And we only have to give select access. We're not going to be changing any of the data. Obviously, it's a view. So again, I'll update. And now if I right click and do a data preview, we still get insufficient privileges because there's one more thing we need to add. So the only other thing we need to add is a repository, a create materialized search result failed. It's because we have to add one more SQL privilege. So within our SQL privileges, the last right we have to add is if I add another SQL privilege and do a search for _sys _bi, click OK. All we have to do here is allocate the execute and select, so we can actually access the view and any of its content and other objects within that schema. So then I'll click on execute. So now we've actually finished that restriction. Let's review what we've got. So we had to add the STS package, of course, so we could actually see the package here. We then added the catalog read and data admin because we weren't able to actually drill into our folder content. Of course, we needed to add the analytic privilege, and for various reasons just explained, we needed to add these three rights as well, these three SQL privileges. We don't need to add any roles, and of course it would make sense rather than allocate these to a user to allocate these to a role and then assign the role to the user. It just makes it easier to admin. So now that we've dealt with the restriction, let's go and see if it works. So now if I right click on my calculation view and do a data preview, if I go to the raw data, you see that the data selected only consists of rows from 1 million plus. So that's a very easy way in which you can use the SAP HANA Studio to do row-level security by using analytic privileges on top of any of your views. And when I say views, I mean attribute views, analytic views, or calculation views. Thanks for watching. You can see more videos at academy.saphana.com.